Hello, everybody. Welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz Dan. I am the IT Geek. And this is episode 6, the final episode of our AVS Azure VMware Solution Zero to Hero. And as always, throughout this series, I'm joined by the hero of the series, Shannon Keane. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, as you can see. I'm not in my normal surroundings.
We've definitely had a couple of days in between when we recorded the initial ones and today,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah. So I'm in the offices at my workplace in Leeds today. But that's not going to stop us from recording this session. We've got some an interesting topic planned for this session. So just for those watching, I'll first of all, how are you? First of all, sorry, I should really ask you how you are.
I'm doing well. I think it's starting to get cold here. It's definitely feeling like it's fall, but I also feel like we've had a lot of weird heat waves too. So I don't know if we're quite ready for fall yet. I keep I always like fall, but it automatically goes almost into winter. We don't get a very long fall. I don't know if it's different by you.
Well, believe it or not, I actually had a barbecue on Saturday or Sunday because the sun was out, but it was not warm, but it wasn't like freezing cold. And because the sun was out, I'm the type of person any excuse for a barbecue, so we ended up
Nice.
having a barbecue. But yeah, it's definitely starting to get a bit dull and grey in the
Yeah.
UK, especially where I am in Yorkshire. But other than that, all good. Yeah, excited and a bit sad at the same time because this is the last episode that we're going to
It
be
is. It is.
doing. It's
Right, and we need some sort of, I don't know if you've got, we should figure out some sort of like fun music maybe in the post-production reel.
Yes, I'll try to come up with some. It's for me personally, this has been an amazing series. VMware, as I probably said in one of the early episodes, very close to my heart. It's when I say grew up, I mean when I first started in IT on
So many of us were
premises.
that way. So many of
Yeah,
us were that way, right?
exactly. And so it's a topic that's close to my heart. And now it's integrating with cloud, Microsoft Cloud, which is what I do now. So I've really wanted to learn about it. I feel like I've learned so much from you, Shannon, and I want to honestly say thank you so much for taking the time to teach me and to teach people who watch my channel. So
That's
thank you very much.
absolutely. I was going to say, I think you're the one that sort of came up with it, and I said, this sounds really fun. So I hope you get a lot of traction from this as well, and we'll have to talk through some of the ways we can amplify this. But I
Yeah.
feel like this is an area where we still don't have a lot of, and we've got a lot of content that we've been able to deliver, but I
Mhm.
feel like some of the community-based folks like yourself haven't had a chance to come in and share content. So we'll have to talk through some of the ways to amplify that message.
No, it's a great subject, and like I said, so far we've looked at how what is AVS. We've looked at how planning. We've looked at actually implementing. Looked at monitoring and alerting last, and now is the final sort of the cherry on the cake, and to go full circle now, and looking at how to back it up really, because it's still infrastructure as a service. You still need to
Right.
back it up. So we'll get straight stuck into the slide deck really, and just for our people that are watching, obviously, as myself and Shannon, episode 6, Zero to Hero, the AVS, and this is backups, how to back it up. Now, I will be handing over to Shannon in a second. So this is what we're going to cover in this episode. Essentially, we're going to looking at some popular integrations of AVS, and then look at what options we have when backing it up. We're going to look specifically, and there's a reason for that. We're going to look specifically at the Veeam Backup Solution because that's what Shannon's going to demo for us. And she's also going to go into some, I think, resources like Shannon around VMware and stuff like that. You can AVS that you can look up yourself. So without further ado, I will hand over to Shannon.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think a lot of times folks are always curious what other customers are doing right now in terms of integrations with Azure VMware Solutions. So I'd like to talk about the fact that once you get your environment in Azure, you can do just about any type of integration. So some of the popular integrations are Azure NetApp files for a file share. So if you wanted to add extra files or extra file share to a server without having to add additional nodes, because that's how you sort of scale up and scale down storage, you could lean on Azure NetApp Files to add that additional storage. There's also the opportunity to lean on Azure Blob Storage. So if you wanted to place your content libraries there, you easily could. There's other ways to sort of extend what you're doing with Azure Blob Storage. So that's a great integration, as well as we have iSCSI disk pools that are in public preview. So similar to the Azure NetApp files, you can sort of extend what you're doing from a storage footprint, which helps you on that return on investment. So you're not having to spin up an additional node. This is great if you run a lot of month-end processes, things of that sort, right? Where you're heavy on the IOPS, heavy on the I need additional storage. You can easily scale up using iSCSI disk pools. That's in public preview though, so remember that it's one of those things where if it's in public preview, it's probably not recommended just yet for production. And the last story I heard is it's going through the last little bits of testing with VMware. So because it's a solution that Microsoft is sort of running and playing point on, VMware has to sort of work with Microsoft to certify the solution. Then you can think about Azure Traffic Manager or Application Gateway, right? So you got a lot of web apps, right? Rather than maybe moving it to a web app out the gate, you could think about having web servers, and you could think about using Azure Traffic Manager to sort of extend the DNS footprint, different regions to region or on-prem to Azure, right? You can think about using it on that front, as well as Application Gateway. That's really hard to do if your environment's living on premises. So you can think about leaning on Application Gateway once your servers are living in AVS. There's support for hub and spoke. So a lot of customers right now already have some sort of implementation in a cloud, right? And if we're talking about Azure specific customers, they probably read the CAF, the WAF, which is the Cloud Adoption Framework, the well-architected framework, as well as the enterprise scale landing zones. And we hit heavy on the idea customers probably want hub and spoke. So AVS sort of fits in that design pattern. You don't have to refactor too much that you've already probably built out from a networking perspective. Then there's the option to integrate with the Microsoft Azure Backup Server. That's our native offering. So if you don't have a backup solution or you're trying to figure out what you want to do from a backup perspective, it's simple just to set up a Microsoft Azure Backup Server inside of Azure and then integrating it with your AVS environment, and you're able to back up your AVS VMs. You can also integrate with a number of third-party backup solutions, as we'll talk through. Then you can think about extending what you're doing with Azure Monitor, Azure Security Center, and Azure Sentinel. So you get all those great operations tools at your disposal, and it's a lot easier to sort of roll those into the mix because of the fact that everything's living a little closer to the ARM APIs. So those are some of the popular integrations that customers are using right now and sort of gravitating toward. When we talk about backup, right, we've got a lot of third-party backup solutions that are certified to run with AVS. So Cohesity is certified, Commvault is certified, Dell Technologies is certified, Rubrik, Veeam, Veritas. These all should feel fairly familiar in terms of the fact that these match up to what most enterprises are using. So if you don't want to lean on the first-party service and you want to bring what you've got on-prem because you've got the skills, you could easily plug that into Azure and have that be an integration point. And there's a lot of really good documentation on how to set it up too. In fact, to get the demo situated, I had to go consult the Veeam documentation because you'll see I ran into some errors. So it's helpful to find some of that documentation, and it's all sort of curated in our Azure VMware Solution documentation. If you go down to some of the how-to tutorials, then you'll see the documentation, the linking to all of the additional third-party vendors.
And I think that's so important as well, Shannon, that a service like this has that flexibility that, okay, if you don't have a backup solution, that you might have a backup solution on premises, but you don't have one that's maybe compatible with that's in this list. You've got Azure Backup, you've got the native backup solution available for you to use, which is great. And then for those clients and organizations have invested in one of these, for example, I know we're going to talk a bit more about Veeam, then again, it's great for them that they have that peace of mind that, yes, I can integrate it with my existing backup solution and still manage it with all the rest of my infrastructure. So just another really great integration that they've put into this service.
Yeah, and supposedly there's more in the mix. So if your backup vendor doesn't show up here yet, you can easily ask your backup vendor, what are the plans to integrate with Azure VMware Solution? And they should be able to tell you what their overall plan is. You know, do they anticipate integrating in the next year? Do they anticipate ever integrating, right? Sometimes those are good conversation points to have with your backup vendor of choice. But I think I would say most of the customers I'm aware of in terms of the backup vendors that are out there, they're using one of these backup solutions. And I'm a huge lover of Veeam. In fact, I always make all these jokes that I run my own home lab, and I've got the community edition, right? And I run my backup servers that I don't want to lose. And Veeam has always been a fantastic resource to lean on. That way you're never without your solutions in the event something happens. And when you sort of run your own home lab, you never know what's going to happen, right? Like something could completely fall down on its face and you need to restore from backup. So, I don't know if you're like me, but we wind up picking all this commodity-based hardware versus the real true server grade pieces, and sometimes things just like to fail, right? If we could account for equipment failing, we'd be magicians. So we could predict when they'd fail, but we can't, right? So having this, and the community edition's free, but I feel like most enterprises that use Veeam, they've got some sort of great maintenance support with them, and I've always liked their offerings. So the great thing here is you don't have to build your Veeam server on your AVS environment. In fact, I'd recommend to place it inside of an Azure virtual network. And here's why: because your vSAN environment is a finite amount of storage unless you add additional nodes. And additional nodes come with a price increase, regardless of if you have a reserved instance or not. So placing that server inside of an Azure VNet and protecting it, right? You don't want to put a public IP on that. You want to have maybe hybrid connectivity set up, or you want to have a bastion host that you're using to grab that info out of the environment. You can have that sort of get backed up to an IaaS instance, and then that IaaS instance will work in conjunction with your AVS environment. And you can always join that IaaS server to a domain. So if you've extended hybrid functionality, it's pretty straightforward to add that VM to the domain so you can patch it, because that's one thing you have to factor in, right? But if you've got everything sort of figured out, you just add that extra server into the mix, right? And it'll get patches and you'll be able to reboot it and add it into the maintenance cycle. But this is a pretty seamless solution, and backing it up from a VM that's closer to Azure VMware Solution versus backing it up across the wire, meaning backing it up back on-prem, it's going to be a faster backup and a faster restore. So that's something to also factor in. And so this diagram will lend itself well to the demo that I've got to show. So I've got a Veeam server here, and I installed SQL Server, so you get a resource for it, right? And the interesting thing is I only am going to just show this to you, right? I'm actually in my jump host behind the Azure Bastion, and I'm in my AVS environment. So I've got 4 servers, and you can tell I was even testing this because I was running into some failures. So I've even got a test VM, right? So this environment is now up, live, and functional, and I've got a Veeam server. And so you see the EPT daily backup, and that just stands for Enterprise Platforms and Tools. That's my team, right? So if I take a look at this, if I take a look at this, you see the servers down here. It's the EPT, ADDS, SDDC, NC, all the different servers that live here in this environment. And then notice how different the IP address scheme is. So the segment inside of AVS is 10.3.0.0/24. So these are automatically getting those IPs. And then the server I'm using for Veeam, it's 10.40.0.5. So it's really hitting home that you want to make sure your environment doesn't have any sort of overlapping CIDR blocks. But it's just like setting up, you could easily add a new virtual machine, right? But the infrastructure is what's cool, right? So I've added my vCenter server, and I had to add it with the DNS host name. So if you remember, that's showing up here, right? So I had to add it this way. And once I added that in, and it's slightly awkward because it seems so long for a DNS name, but once I added that in, I was able to then take a look at the environment, and it's looking at this cluster, and these are what make up the cluster, right?
So is that the okay? So the same as you would traditionally an on-premises environment. You just get asked for some, once you enter that DNS FQDN, you get asked for some credentials, I'm assuming.
Correct. Yeah. So I think if I go back to the home and I go into the job, and let's say we wanted to edit it, right? I think I can go to the guest processing. So I've got a couple of credentials. This is the great way to see it. So I've got my domain account, and then I've got cloud admin. So the way that I added the vCenter environment into Veeam was I used the cloud admin at vSphere.local.
vSphere.local, yep, okay.
And I think I mentioned this. It's very similar to the administrator at vSphere.local. The account you get when you build out a brand new vCenter environment or a brand new vSphere environment, right? Ever so slightly different though, because there's certain things you just cannot control with this account, i.e. you're not controlling the ESXi host directly. Microsoft is. You can open up an expedited support ticket and you can get root access to it with Microsoft sort of providing it, but you don't natively have access to it. So we went the route of creating this cloud admin at vSphere.local, which has sort of all of the right permissions that you would want. But once you add this to your Active Directory environment, once you join this to a domain, you could do the same permissioning. And then another thing to mention here too is because you don't have access to the root of your ESXi host, you would have to open up an expedited ticket with Microsoft to join it to your Active Directory domain.
Right. Yeah. I think you said that. Yeah, I think you said that.
I think I did. Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, but it's one of those things too. Like I just did this because I'm doing a very quick demo, but I'm also showing that you have flexibility here. So if you don't want to use your cloud admin at vSphere.local, which I would recommend, you probably want to have named admin accounts, right? Versus this one account that everybody might use. It's straightforward to do. And then you just add it in as a credential inside of Veeam. And then, obviously you see the successes, right? So this ran successfully. And the reason it looks like it's super late is because this is UTC, what is it, 0? Regular UTC time. This is based, I think, closer to your time zone than mine. So I ran this tonight. And then you get the same sort of thing, right? This failed because I didn't put the credentials in correctly, or I didn't register it correctly. So it's very similar to what you would see on premises, and that sort of hits home that you can take those skills and you can translate them to the cloud without having to learn something brand new. Now, Azure Backup is not terrible to learn, right? Especially if you want to think about it too, it may not be something bad to have as an extra backup because of the fact that you sort of lose the idea of that, 3, 2, 1? So 3 copies of your backup, 2 different types of media, 1 off-site. When you're backing everything up into the cloud, you may want to think about another backup vendor. And Microsoft Backup is a great, I guess, solution if you're trying to think about something that would work in conjunction with Veeam. That way you're sort of covered. But yeah, I mean, this is probably the easiest to set up. Well, take that back. Any of these backup vendors are easy to set up, especially if you have all the skill set. But Veeam, I often feel like, is just so straightforward. The installation's so easy, and it sets up a local copy of SQL, and you don't have to worry too much about getting everything stood up and ready to go. So it will automatically install all of the prereqs that you might potentially be missing, and it'll add that local SQL copy. You can always move that SQL to a different environment if you needed to, but the idea being these servers inside this specific backup job, they live in my SDDC, my Azure VMware Solution software-defined data center, completely different network segment, but I'm able to back it up because of the way that we have leaned on the NSX layer of software-defined networking for Azure VMware Solution.
I'm a big fan of Veeam. Again, traditionally, I started off using Veeam with VMware.
Yeah.
And even Hyper-V environments, but yeah, big fan of Veeam. So that's amazing how it's all that compatibility is there and all that integration with a utility, a backup product that, again, a lot of clients, a lot of organizations will have their team that have skilled up in this. So it's great they can use that.
Yeah, and I feel like any one of these vendors, you could do the same sort of, I guess, demo or same sort of POC, right? So if you weren't really comfortable with Veeam, or you weren't a Veeam customer, you could spin up Commvault, you could spin up Veritas, Rubrik, Cohesity. All of the great documentation lives in our documentation. I guess you should say it links to the right documentation. So if you're curious as to find some of that, maybe what we could do is in the show notes include where all of that documentation lives.
Yeah,
so I'll share that link with you. That way, when when we publish this, or when you publish this, we've got a spot for folks to go to if they're really curious, because I feel like it's probably better to pre-plan, especially on the backup front, because you never know when things are going to wind up corrupted, or you have to restore some mission critical document that was randomly deleted and you have to restore it from your backup the day before, right? Because replication is different than backup, right? If you're
Yeah,
replicating the environment, you may have already replicated the deletion of the file or the corrupted file. So you have to go back to the backup. And so I think pre-planning some of this ahead of time makes sense. So we'll definitely include that link.
excellent. That's great. No, really interesting demo, and like I said, being very close to my heart, so it's good to see it working.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and it's one of those things too. If you run into failures, there's a lot of good documentation, but it is pretty straightforward. I just had to go in, like I said, and
Yeah.
register the vCenter DNS name. And it dawned on me too, the reason that it failed. I thought it was the fact that I didn't register the DNS name correctly. No, I registered that correctly. It failed because I used the wrong credentials, which those things happen. Even the
Yeah, do.
experienced, seasoned folks, you can use the wrong credentials. So I think in order to really wrap this up, I want to go back into the presentation and leave you with a lot of great spots to go learn more. So we also want to leave you with a couple of great resources in terms of ways to get better with Azure VMware Solution. So this is a joint effort. Microsoft worked with VMware to build out hands-on labs. Now, if you're familiar with VMware, VMware's always offered these hands-on labs, right? Because vCenter and vSphere, sometimes it's hard to build out that environment sitting on commodity-based hardware, right? A lot of us run our own home labs. So sometimes it's easier to go and do that click-through tutorial, and we've done that for Azure VMware Solution. The first hands-on lab involves the private cloud deployment and connectivity, so you get a feel for how to deploy that in the portal. And that was recently refreshed too, because the UI recently changed in the last couple of months here. Same with the HCX deployment and migration. That click-through lab has also been updated, so you get a feel for how you build out the HCX environment, how you then connect that into an Azure VMware Solution, and how you migrate a VM from on-premises into Azure VMware Solution. So I like this as a hands-on lab sort of idea of how to sort of configure it and get everything set up. And then I worked with the team here at Microsoft, the Learn team, to build out an Azure VMware Solution Learn path. So right now we have 3 modules built. There's the intro module, the deployment module, and the migration module. And these modules will sort of take you through the step-by-step tutorial of how to set everything up. The one thing we can't do in this scenario is offer up a sandbox. And I know if you're familiar with Learn, that's sort of a, oh, it would be nice. It's just, it's hard to do it with Azure VMware Solution. And so we're trying to figure out, do we evolve and take this to a click-through tutorial? So those are some of the things that we hope we can possibly offer very similarly to VMware, right? So, but right now, if you have a subscription and you're looking to spin this up, following the Microsoft Learn module will give you an idea on how to set everything up so that you're successfully migrating VMs from on-premises into Azure VMware Solution. And then I always like to talk through these resources as well. So the overview is sort of the great landing page, right? That's sort of the marketing splash page, so to speak. It'll help you with all of the great talking points if you're trying to pitch this to somebody that's higher up on the ladder, right? Meaning your boss or your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss, right? Those are the great sort of talking points. And then the AVS documentation, that's everything, right? That's the overview. That's the FAQ, the how things get patched, everything surrounding how to set it up, deploy it, connect it, the prereqs involved. There's a lot of great tutorials, and that landing page continues to get bigger and bigger. So some of the tutorials are really interesting. Some of the integrations, like we even have a tutorial for how to integrate GitHub Enterprise, which is super fascinating because it sort of hits home the idea that you can start to innovate and use DevOps tooling, right?
Wow.
The Azure VMware Solution videos. So one of the global black belts, he has a playlist that he's curated, and he's always doing interesting stuff with Azure VMware Solution. It's usually based upon customers he's working with. And as a result, he's published these with that tiny URL, that specific URL itself. And just, if you're curious to see some more content, he's always doing something interesting with AVS. I recommend bookmarking the ports and protocols if you've got a restrictive environment, just because of the fact that VMware's got the right ports and protocols that need to be allowed in the event you're setting up HCX or AVS, right? So these types of things are something that you'll probably want to look at with your network team. The HCX documentation in and of itself is pretty expansive. So I always recommend reading through that, especially if you're not familiar with HCX. So HCX is kind of a newer flavor or kind of a newer tool, I should say, right? Because prior to HCX, we would just straight vMotion a server from different environments. Now, HCX allows you to stand up a site pairing, and it's kind of like an IPsec tunnel or an IPsec VPN tunnel. And you can then replicate your servers over that HCX connection to different environments. And that doesn't necessarily have to be Azure, right? It could be a different colo too. The release notes are important. You'll want to know as you upgrade, because you'll probably have to upgrade your on-premises deployment. So you may want to understand what's changed when upgrades come about. So the release notes are always helpful on that front. And then I also included the Azure Migrate documentation, just because of the fact that we've talked about the idea that you can now run an AVS assessment, right? But Azure Migrate's sort of matured as well, right? It's not just IaaS. It's, you can look at your web apps. You can look at your data environment. Can it go to Azure SQL? You can even look at VDI deployments now, which is crazy, right? So Azure Migrate continues to expand and continues to evolve. And the reason I included it on this slide here is because now you can run the Azure VMware Solution assessments, which will help you related to pricing. And then, we talked about it, but if you apply a reserved instance, either a 1 year or a 3 year, you're able to start reaping the benefits of having heavily discounted compute for your VMware environments.
That's amazing, Shannon. Thank you again for sharing those resources. Really interesting demo as well. I think what's almost really left is for us to close off the series. A lot of information, a lot of great content, a lot of great demos as well throughout the series. So honestly, from me again, thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate everybody's comments and likes, and everybody who's sharing it, who's shared the videos. And as I said, just please continue to watch the series and this final episode. If you have any comments, by all means, you can get Shannon on her Twitter feed, her Twitter that's there in her at the bottom of the screen, or mine. Please do like the videos, and for the last time, hit that subscribe button.
Smash it.
Smash that subscribe button.
Yeah.
But again, thank you very much, Shannon. And I'm a bit sad. It's been so much fun doing this.
We'll have to find another something to talk about, right? Because I feel
we
like
will. I'm sure we will.
Azure's so vast. We'll definitely keep the ball kind of moving. We'll find an opportunity to collaborate in the future.
Definitely. But no, thank you again. Thank you to all everyone who's watching. Up until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.